Hello, my name is Andrew Weaver from NEHC Academy, and in this video I want to show you how to resolve a lipoma. That's Lipoma, and specifically using weighted tuning forks to resolve a lipoma. We worked on several of these in North Healing Center, and we want to show you the technique that we would use in that case. So we have Lucy here, our client, and she came in and asked for us to help her with her lipoma. So what we're talking about here, if you Google the term lipoma, it's most of the results that you're going to get has something to do with a fatty deposit that's just underneath the skin. If you press down on it, it's a little bit rubbery, but you can actually feel a lump underneath the skin. It is non-cancerous or benign, and sometimes you can move it around a little bit. So let's say in her leg right here on her thigh, I see the lipoma, and let's say it's about like this. So that means that there is a lump right in the center of that circular area, and then it kind of comes down a little bit more at a time, almost like a hill comes down into a flat land here. And as I'm pressing, I can feel fattiness underneath the area where the lump is not. As it transitions into the rest of the tissue of the thigh here, there are areas that will feel normal to me as I'm pressing down with my fingers. And then I get into an actual area here as I'm pressing down, and it feels more fatty, lumpy, squishy, and it's contained to an area. The lipids and the fatty cells are being held in an area for whatever reason. It's not an understanding here for us to be diagnosing. It's just for us to be helping. And what is it that we're feeling when it comes to using tuning forks to resolve something like this? We have successfully resolved several lipomas in different areas throughout the body. When you Google it and get the results for Google, normally we find that lipomas are from the waist up in different areas, like on the neck, the shoulders, the torso, even under the armpits. My grandfather had a very large lipoma on the inside of his knee, and it was extremely large. It was just below the knee joint. So they can be below the knee as well. The resolution of a lipoma really has one main factor to it. Using the weighted tuning fork and pressing it down onto the skin enough to get the tissue to loosen up, and this is very similar to what we would do in our fat reduction processes, where we're getting the fat lipids to release, but more importantly, we're getting the fascia fibers that are holding it in place to release as well, and then all the fluids that are built up around it. Right at the middle of that lipoma, what you're going to find, or what we have found every time, is that there's a core, a much harder lump at the middle, usually found at the middle. That's the part that the Google results, like WebMD or Wikipedia or something like that, where they say that you can move it around just underneath the skin. It's imperative, or that's the most important thing, is to get to the core and resolve the core. Otherwise, if you just start reducing the fatty tissue around the core and then leave the core, you'll find that lipoma will start to grow again. So successful resolution really relies on your ability to get to that core and to reduce that core down to where you don't feel anything there at all. And then you may need to do more work to get that tissue away from that area. So I talked about fascia fibers, and in our work at North Healing Center and NEHC Academy, we do a lot of focus, a lot of research on the superficial fascia, which is where a lot of our pain relief, a lot of our movement resolution, getting a person that may have had surgery in a location and they're just trying to get moving again. A lot of the things for recovery, rehabilitation, really has a lot to do with the fascia, the collagen fibers that are happening right underneath your skin. So some people will call that the adipose layer. That means that the fibers that are underneath your dermis, actually that's where the lipids, the adipose are housed inside of the spaces of your fascia collagen fibers underneath your skin. And this is where a lot of the fluid is getting built up. Collagen, the collagen fibers, the fascia, is designed to do a few things very well. It's designed to tighten up when it needs to, and if things go wrong, it'll still continue to tighten up even more around something, whether that is a tumor. We see that in a tumor, as it gets harder and harder, that's because of the fascia fibers that are wrapping around to that tumor. I'm not saying that a fatty lipoma is a tumor at all. In fact, we know it to be benign. That's the definition of a lipoma. But the same sort of thing is occurring, that the collagen fibers are trying to wrap around and create lumps. Most of the lumps you have underneath the skin have almost everything to do with the fascia fibers themselves. The secret here is that the tuning forks, the weighted tuning forks, when you strike them, press a weighted tuning fork against the skin, the tissue underneath it, the collagen fibers, the fascia fibers are releasing their tension. The fluids that are built up in that area get shaken enough to start to release themselves, and so do the lipids, the fattiness that we're talking about here. As they get vibrated and as you put tension on them, compression, that changes the whole condition. So what we really need to focus on here is tuning fork on the skin, pressure, leaving it there for a certain period of time, and you will feel the fat layers in the fascia start to loosen up and move away. So let me get down to the actual application of what we're going to do here. I have a 128 hertz weighted tuning fork here. I am not saying that that's the only frequency that will work in this. Please do your own experiments. Use other weighted tuning forks of various frequencies, but we know that a 128 hertz tuning fork does successfully resolve a lipoma. So this is a typical process that we use at New Earth Healing Center, and it's also the process that we teach in NEHC Academy on striking and placing a weighted tuning fork. I have my tuning fork in my right hand. Use whichever hand you want. The other hand will be your sensing hand. I'm using the pads on my fingers, these two fingers. Really, I'm using all of my fingers to feel around, but I just get used to knowing what's underneath these two fingers, because they are also going to be the marking fingers for where to place my tuning fork. I'm feeling around on this lipoma that Lucy has, and I don't quite feel the lump yet because it's been there long enough to start to tighten those fascia fibers, and more fibers get laid down, and it gets harder and harder and harder. If this occurs in your lipoma, you want to work from the outside in and start to loosen up those fibers so you can get to the lump underneath it if you can't feel it right away. If you can feel it right away, go for the core. And sometimes these fingers are going to keep the core in place, so they'll be in between your two fingers. Lodge it in place so that it doesn't move when you place the tuning fork right on top of the core, okay? So in this case, the situation is I can't feel the core yet, but I know it's there. I need to start to reduce from the outside in so that I can release some of the tension on the fibers, the tissue. So I'm feeling around, and I need to know what good feels like. So I'm feeling the tissue that doesn't have the fatty deposit underneath as I'm pressing down. So I feel the outer edge of it, and then I go in a little bit, It's still a little bit soft. I can feel some squishiness underneath, but then it starts to get a little bit harder. So there's the edge that I'm really looking for. So I keep my fingers there. They're going to be the place that's going to mark the spot when I strike and place my tuning fork. So in this case, I'm keeping my hand there, and I'm going to use my striking point here on my knee. It's in the fatty portion of the inner part of my knee. I'm not striking on bone. I'm striking the tuning fork. I'm bringing it over here, and I'm laying it right on the tissue itself, in between my two fingers, and it's right even with my fingernails, the center of my fingernails. Okay. So when I'm pressing it down on the skin, I'm pressing it down with a little bit of tension. I usually say to press hard and press often. There is a tension that you need here. It's not just laying the tuning forks right on the skin and hoping for the best. That's not what's going to have this lipoma result. It is striking it, coming over and placing it, and then putting some downward tension on that tuning fork, because you need to be able to loosen up the fascia fibers, and in order to do that, it's movement, vibration, it's also compression. That's key here. And when fascia fibers are so tight that they create a hardness, more pressure is needed in some cases, more compression. So I strike, I let it run out. I strike again. I'm pressing down in the same spot if I haven't felt any difference. So when my fingers are here, what you're feeling for is a change in the tissues, because I'm on both sides of the tuning fork. So I'm feeling for the vibration. I don't care whether I can feel the vibration as much as I'm feeling for a change in the tissues. So you can feel certain things like fluids running underneath it. We use this analogy of strawberries through a straw. When you have a strawberry shake and a strawberry gets stuck in the straw, you start to suck harder, and then eventually the strawberry gets released, and then you start to feel all these other clumps behind it sucking through the straw. And that's what you're going to feel here when fluids start to be released, and all of the materials that are in the fascia layer here, the superficial fascia layer, they're going to be releasing as well. You're going to feel that the fascia fibers themselves will start to let go, and then there will actually be a resolving of the fascia fibers eventually, and then the fluids that are stuck in there, the lipids, the lipids inside of the adipose cells will start to flush themselves out as well. So you could strike once, place the tuning fork on there, whether you feel a change or not. Sometimes it'll be just a slight melting. Your fingers will start to sink in a little bit, and then feel in that same spot again. If you need a second strike, keep your fingers in the same spot. Put your tuning fork in the same spot if you don't feel something change within that first strike. So within our sound healing or tuning fork, weighted tuning fork community, there is a concern about nitric oxide and placing the tuning forks too many times in one spot. That specifically is for other concerns with the release of nitric oxide gas and the whole puffing cycle. We're not concerned about it at this point because we're more concerned about releasing tension in the fascia fibers. So keep that in mind. More placements sometimes is better. The client can handle more than 2 or 3 placements in the same spot. So you may need to do more than 2 placements or 3. So if I put it back in the same spot, you're going to feel some sort of difference. As you resolve towards the core, you're going to feel possibly that where my fingers are now, it's going to feel just like where the fatty tissue or where the normal tissue is feeling off to the side as you You really need to know what good tissue feels like in this client and what the fatty lipoma tissue feels like. Really get a comparison so you know when you're gaining ground on this. So I feel that everything looks or feels a little bit less tense, not as hard. And now that I've relieved a little bit of tension here, I can start to feel a little bit of that clumpiness from the fatty tissue underneath it. So I want to move my hands a little bit more. Work across the entire tension part of this where it's kind of hard feeling. Striking, placing, waiting, feeling what it feels like. Okay, now I'm getting used to this. Feels like strawberries through a straw. I can feel things moving. Okay, the fingers are sinking down a little bit. I'm pressing down more with my sensing hand. Okay, so that feels a little bit lumpy now, so I know I got through that hard covering that's over it. I'm striking again, placing it one more time. Okay, so now I feel something that looks a little bit different, or feels a little bit different. I feel a core now. I would work the entire area. If there's a hard shell over it, I would resolve the hard shell first, because you want to relieve the tension in the fascia fibers first. Then I feel a core right in the center. It's maybe a ½ an inch in diameter. So I feel that core. I'm putting my 2 fingers in between to lodge it in between the fingers, because as soon as you put the tuning fork down on top of that ball or that lump, it's possibly just going to move right out from underneath it. You don't want that. So I'm holding it in place now. I have the core in sight and in field. So I'm placing the tuning fork right down on top of it. Now, once you place it on top of it, press down hard. This could be painful for the client, and sometimes, especially when there's calcium buildup in lumps, especially when it's near bone. This doesn't happen to be near bone, but calcium buildup sometimes gets a little bit painful. So it's not always painful for your clients, but this possibly could. When you're pressing down on that lump, press down, keep pressed down, and then you may be striking 2 or 3, maybe 5 to 7 times. And since the ball is in between, or the lump is in between of the fingers, after the tuning fork vibration runs out, I want to check that ball again. I'm pressing down on it to feel, and I'm comparing to what it was like from the previous strike. It's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually, if you resolve the core, that means when you press down on it, you can resolve this thing completely. And so that there's no more core, but there might be some fatty tissue still around it, and that's okay. Sometimes that fatty tissue, once the core is gone, will resolve itself in a couple days, or you can press down with your fingers or your thumbs and move and kind of press and push that fluid and anything else that's released itself. Because remember, what's happening here is those fascia fibers are still tight. The fascia fibers will keep laying themselves down like a spider web over and over again over time and hold all of that stuff in place. When you place your tuning forks on the fascia fibers, it releases the tension and starts to change the whole environment. It's taking fluids that are thick and snotty-like, and it's turning them into water temporarily. So you can sometimes take and press down and kind of push some of the fluids, and maybe the lipids themselves had released themselves back into the extracellular matrix where this fascia is living. So you're pushing it out. That way the rest of the body can resolve and eliminate what now becomes back into possibly, hopefully, the elimination system, and resolving those fluids. Maybe it moves into the lymphatic system and gets processed correctly. So at that point, what I've covered here is this particular lipoma. We needed to get to the core. It had a hard covering over it first, so I worked on that first, worked from the outside, worked towards the center. I got rid of that hardened area first. I found the core. I put the lump in between my two fingers to hold them in place. I did several strikes, holding it down on top of that lump, and I worked from the core once I found it. And then once the core was down to I couldn't find it anymore, then I went through and pushed some of the remaining fluids out a little bit. It's okay, and it's considered resolved by us if the core is gone and maybe there's still some fattiness, some squishiness around in a circle. You can always have that client come back and continue to resolve that. But if you get rid of the core first, then the rest of the sessions after that will go much better and much faster. And sometimes the body can resolve it on its own once the core is gone. Although I would say to you that one session should be enough to resolve the core, and then make sure that happens first, and then you can work on whatever you need to in successive sessions if you don't have enough time. Maybe it takes you the entire session just to get the core resolved. Other things that I want to talk about before the end of this video is the way that I'm holding the tuning fork. So the popular holding part for a weighted tuning fork is down on the step. At New Earth Healing Center, and we teach this at the Academy, is that in order to get the pressure that you really need here, I'm holding it up on the yoke itself, and actually sometimes I'm using downward pressure in that U shape right here. In a weighted tuning fork, most of the movement on the tines is going to be in the upper third with the weights. So those are moving quite a bit. In fact, you can do this yourself. Do a strike and then put your thumb right in that U and see that it's still vibrating. So have a little bit of confidence with the fact that, unlike unweighted tuning forks, this tuning fork is still vibrating. About right here is where it starts to dampen. But if I strike it again, and if I hold my fingers right here, this thing's still vibrating. So sometimes in order to get the downward pressure that you need, I even hold my thumb or put my thumb right into the U of the weighted tuning fork and just press down. That gives you enough tension, downward pressure, to be able to have the pressure that you need. So keep that in mind. Play around with the way that you're holding your tuning forks, the weighted tuning forks, and this might help you with having the essential or the correct pressure when you are resolving a lipoma. All right, so this is New Earth Healing Center or NEHC Academy. This is our video on resolving lipomas.